I had a friend who killed themselves because they feared that a lot of people will judge him based on the mistake that they did, and no other people will accept them because they have a very judgy society within their sphere. They left this world thinking that a lot of people will hate them because of what they did, because that's how the status quo was socially formulated in the world that they live. It's really unfortunate, and it really makes me mad that we live in a world where societies jump into judgment before constructive build-up for our social collective ground. Like, it's kind of preternatural in the first place, especially knowing that every advancement in human understanding in terms of social grounds emerges from the recognition that something does not work, and therefore we should fix this collectively, and that's how we view social narrative. That's why that shame, fear, and self-destructive bottling up is something that op needs to fix within their submissions, because I still don't hear any concessions that these things happen in their end. Because in the current state of the event, we do have people who give proper feedback, but it only happens in cases where people are mature. But in the normal ground, society is really not accepting of failures. Like, that's why their version of cancel culture and the status quo is not that substantiated, and it's away from proper arbitration. That's why most of the time people fail in gauging this. Clarification before I start with our lineups. The mistakes implied within the motion are like personal mistakes. This is not about the extreme cases like what you're going to hear coming from them. Simply because this debate is about whether or not living in a world where personal mistakes of individuals living in our society should be considered as something that is bad for the sake of our survival. That's why we feel disgust towards them, are better than our proposal of living in a world where people can all maturely welcome these mistakes into their normal conversation and actually try to improve our collective conditions further. This is me being fair to op since they missed the real comparison here. Again, first issue on the technicality of the setup of the motion itself. How should we really view this debate? First of all, this is a THPX world motion, a world reset, which allowed Joseph to postulate that this results to the erasure of the norm of embarrassment or performativism at large in our macro lens, which simply points out that the intra and inter shame that we feel for your own or someone's mistake will not be cultural in our world, despite of having the possibility of feeling a minuscule rush that, this is so embarrassing, I did something bad. The difference is, that exists in both sides of the house, but the difference is, we propel this feeling and push people to think that, oh, this is bad, but this is not the end of the world. People will not negatively judge me since we're all broken pieces trying to fix each other to form a crystallized society due to the normalization of these conversations in the beginning. That's why, rather than self-destructive method of harming oneself out of embarrassment, whether psychological or physically, it's not going to happen in our end if we fix this early on in our world reset. No, the case coming from CO and even from OO is arbitrary. You can either be somehow be more open to other people, like your family. You can also have a family that might be willing to listen to your mistake rather than getting mad whenever you open up to them. The problem in this substance is that this proves Joseph's case that we don't have a clear social perspective in our bubbles of acceptance in our society, to the point that in Op's world, a judgmental society will still persist at large. It's just that there's some outliers who may be more mature to them, or maybe more understanding. That's why we don't have those constructive dialogues, and it will only happen here in our world at large. And this is what opposition is also missing, even in CO, because as stated by Joseph, again, as per WDC manual, that means from the initial status of the world buildup, the pressure, anxiety, and fear that your fragility will be used against you is diminished. When in the beginning, people are constructively engineered to this normalization because people are opening up substantially in this conversation from the beginning, as substantiated by Joseph. More on this later. No one means forcing you to share, unlike OO's out of the world claim. It's just that the society is accepting when people open up in the basis of our collective moral ground. Bro, no one is going holding a gun in your head to force a statement. OG is just individualistic, and we also extend this further into macro lens, like how society would thrive with this new initial order for their world. You get more explicit mac on how it would happen and how likely impacts will exist, because we explained that we currently have a hindering factor in our society. That's why all of those arbitrary brew points that you got from top half is simply, somehow random. No, this is only coming from CG, where the motion is being debated as should be, and this is not. This house prefers normalizing conversation about one's failure over bottling up in your own. Read. we have a mech to simply reset the world and, view it how it would start if we don't have those countervailing narratives that we have. And we started from this initial status as a society. Second issue, in terms of macro, do we really exclusively solve the issue that we have mentioned? Parenthetically, I just want to clear out that naturally we feel embarrassed with our mistake. That's the first reaction that we have. But in the status quo, then this is the comparative that CO and O is missing, and that's why they are still unengaging with their own trade-offs. We were engineered to feel jealousy or prejudice to one's action. And vis-a-vis, this also pushes people who hear their failures as somehow or something prejudicial conversely. Because we created cultural normalization of shunning people within this quote-unquote failure bubble in hyper-competitive ground that we have created, i.e. capitalism, that has enabled us to have cultures of bullying, blackmailing, and class separationist ideals because they use the narrative that people should feel self-disgust when they make a mistake, hereby allowing people to use it as a chain to lock them in their own sphere, which corrodes societal balance and expectation in our society. And we claim that it is the sole reason why people are easy to get pitted like a rat because of this self-caging narrative that we have. And the comparative coming from Joseph is a countervailing mechanism that allows to democratize our narrative, i.e. allowing us to have a society from the start that is accepting because individuals' problem sharing mechanism, not just having an isolated perspective of viewing that failure, is somehow that's going to fix this kind of issue. Let's break it down then. In terms of feedback, you have a society with different moral footing from the start, which if you share your mistake to your peers within your purview, due to the normalization of these loops, the moral interpretation of that disclosure fundamentally shifts. And the comparative here is that the more loop recurs, the more society reorganizes around flexible moral reasoning. That's why you probably can see in the normal ground, in the normal societal expectation, that children are much more open to talk with their parents regarding their personal problems that they don't need to gauge maybe my parents are somehow conservative, they're not that liberal. Because from the beginning, we put it on the middle ground. Hence, the glass of unreasonable conservative view of refutation will only be broken down in a world that we built here in CG.